The United States appears to have reached a new level of hypocrisy as Biden says that Israel is indiscriminately killing civilians, but vows to continue supporting it, as Blinken says that Israel needs to do more to stop killing so many civilians, but then continues to support it, and as the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, vowed to veto any resolution that directly called for a ceasefire, but then when the other members of the Security Council agreed and just put forth a resolution calling for more humanitarian aid, not directly demanding a ceasefire, then the US ambassador came forward and said that she knew that much more needed to be done. And yet, the United States is the country that is refusing to allow that to happen over and over again as it continues to stand by and to support Israel's crimes and to make them possible in the first place. We discussed all of that with a special guest, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Kevork Almassian, a political commentator and founder of Syriana Analysis. Kevork, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a really pleasure to be with you again.
Thank you. Now, I know that when it comes to the current situation in Gaza, that's something you've been covering a lot. And when looking at the latest, we have Reporters Without Borders, which has filed its second complaint with the International Criminal Court over war crimes committed by Israel against Palestinian journalists in Gaza when it comes to the clear targeting of journalists, along with obviously children, women, doctors, and UN staff. Why don't you think we're seeing more of a push to invoke international law right now?
This is a very interesting question to ask, actually. The case of Israel is very special, in my opinion, for multiple reasons. One of which is Israel is not a signatory for multiple international, let's say, conventions that can give jurisdiction for international courts, especially when it comes to human rights abuses, violation of human rights, international law, war crimes, crimes against humanity. Therefore, these courts let's say, independently cannot move against Israel unless, of course, there is a decision from the UN Security Council that can assign a court, whether it's a special court regarding a special case that is happening in Palestine or in general. And in both cases, I think the UN Security Council, of course, it will not pass this resolution because the United States will veto it for sure. And secondly, because Israel itself is not a signatory of multiple, I would say, conventions that can give this court's jurisdiction over Israel. I mean, let's remember what happened in the past few weeks after the 7th of October. There were multiple resolutions submitted in the UN Security Council in order to vote for ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. And the United States has vetoed all of them. Just a few days ago, the United States was working day and night to add revisions over a UAE-sponsored resolution regarding the delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip. Even that, the United States wanted to make sure that only limited amount of humanitarian aid and only through what they call credible humanitarian organizations that are supervised by the United States. And they wanted to do lots of revisions over the resolution. So we are far away from a ceasefire. So imagine how far we are from persecuting Israel in front of international courts. This is something that, in my opinion, is not going to happen under the current unipolar world led by the United States, that they call it the US-led rules-based order.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it was just frustrating to watch that back and forth that you were mentioning in the UN Security Council over the course of this week, because you look at these countries trying to change the language, trying to make it any way so that the US won't veto it. And then after they had the resolution they finally passed, the US ambassador, Linda Thomas Greenfield, came out and she goes, "Oh, well, we know that there's much more that needs to be done." And it's like, yeah, you're right. There is much more that needs to be done. Your country is the one preventing it. What do you make of the rhetoric that we're getting, especially from the Biden administration right now, where it's like Blinken will make these statements and he'll say, yeah, we told Israel that they need to stop killing so many civilians, but yet they ignore the fact that the US holds all of the tools to really put pressure on Israel and it's refusing to use them.
Actually, the United States can stop these massacres now in the Gaza Strip. If they vote in favor of the resolution for a ceasefire, this carnage stops in the Gaza Strip. However, there is also a point that is very important. If the United States votes in favor of a ceasefire, and if Israel doesn't abide by the ceasefire, then who is in charge of who? People will start asking themselves this question that if Israel doesn't abide by a US sponsored ceasefire, then the United States doesn't have influence over its closest ally. And this will also tarnish and damage the reputation of the United States as a superpower. So, in my opinion, there are increasing voices in the Biden administration in behind closed doors. They want for this carnage to stop because it is damaging the American reputation in the region. The United States can nowadays pursue friendly relationship with the people of the region, do business with the people of the region, and they had the choice of reviving the Arab initiative for peace with Israel and establish a two-state solution for the Israelis and for the Palestinians. However, the Netanyahu government is very stubborn and they don't believe in a two-state solution. They believe in a one-state solution under the Zionist rule. And in order to do that, this is something very important people, in my opinion, need to know. Israel has a problem with its demographics. If they want to create a one state solution, they need to be sure that the Jewish people, in terms of the quantity of the people, the population need to be more than the Palestinians. Because in case of a one state solution, if they are going to allow the Palestinians to vote, then the Palestinian voices will be more than the Israeli voices in a one state solution. Therefore, as a precondition or a prerequisite or a pre-phase for establishing a one-state solution from the point of view of the radical, right-wing, racist, fascist government in Tel Aviv at the moment, they have to expel 2.2 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to Sinai and then distribute them in the European countries. This is the plan. And unless they kick out 2.2 million people, they will always have this demographic problem in Israel, in the future envisioned Israel in the minds of the planners in Tel Aviv. However, this could have a strong backlash for multiple reasons. One, the Egyptians are not playing chess with the Israelis in this regard. For them, kicking out 2.2 million Palestinians and housing them in temporary, let's say, housings or tents, they want to build them tent cities, etc. What would happen if a few Palestinians gather in the Sinai and say, we're going to go back to our homes, we're going to go back to our farms, we're going to go back to our country and city, to the Gaza Strip. And then the Israeli government will block them to go to their homes, right? And what if these Palestinians use arms, rightfully so, to go back to their homes, because they have the right to go back to their homes? Then Israel will come and will say, now there is a danger coming from the Sinai, and now I have to come to Sinai and create another buffer zone in the Sinai region. And this has happened in 1967. 1967, Israel occupied the Sinai Peninsula and also occupied the Golan Heights because they said they need a buffer zone with Syria and with Egypt. Therefore, this is all this charade and this circus that Netanyahu is doing. It all serves their radical vision of the greater Israel. This is not my words. If you see what they're speaking and the maps they're presenting for themselves, it starts from the Nile in Egypt and it ends in the Euphrates in Syria and Iraq. They have a vision of a grand Israel. Therefore, this, let's say, the war in the Gaza Strip, it could really go out of hand, and there would be other powers intervene this time to stop it, because they will be the next victims of this war. And I'm specifically now, I mean Hezbollah. Hezbollah's intervention is a game changer. Everybody knows that Israel doesn't want for Hezbollah to wage a ground offensive. The United States doesn't want for Hezbollah to wage a ground offensive. If this starts, it's not going to end with Hezbollah, because what Hezbollah can do in this conflict is they can neutralize the air bases of Israel. They have precision missiles with thousands of them. They're not like Hamas. Hezbollah has an open access between Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, Tehran, they are receiving technology, they are receiving ammunition, they are receiving weaponry from different places. And they are producing their own as well. But these weapons are not like the weapons of Hamas. They can neutralize the air force and the air bases of Israel. And if that happens, where will the Israeli fighter jets land? They will land on the American aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. And that's why the American aircraft carriers are at the moment in the Mediterranean, in the Arabian Sea, because they want to assist Israel in case of this war goes out of hand. So when we see the set goals of Israel, ethnic cleansing, genocide, establishing complete Israel over the Palestinian territories, those are crazy goals and they are unattainable without big bloodshed. Therefore, in my opinion, the possibility of this war to be split over the area and let's say spread in the area is very high. And the only power that can stop this from happening is the United States. But the Americans have to ask themselves this question: who is in charge of this? Is the United States in charge of Israel because the United States gives most of the weapons that Israel is using nowadays in the Gaza Strip? Or it is the Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C., which is funding the congressmen, congresswomen, the military. They have very good relationship with the military-industrial complex, and they have a leverage over the foreign policy of the United States. This is a question that the Americans have to answer, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we see the effects of that Israeli lobby playing out every single day. Now, it's interesting because what you're bringing up there, when it comes to this possibility of this becoming a regional war, right? And seeing all of this backlash, because right now there's kind of the feeling of other nations in the region saying, okay, we're going to hold back a little bit. You saw Hezbollah saying, look, we're going to, hold back on our end, just focus on the border at the moment.
Hmm.
And when it comes to the United States, I know that on their end, they're thinking, oh, we're the most powerful military in the world. We can handle any of this. But when you're watching what's happening in the Red Sea, it's actually kind of fascinating because you've got Yemen coming in and saying, you know what? We're going to do what is in our power to do in order to push for a ceasefire. And it's really giving the US a challenge. Now, of course, Washington comes out and they say, okay, we're going to create Operation Prosperity Guardian. We're going to get our allies on board. But then you have Spain saying it won't participate, France saying it will only send some personnel, but no ships. When it comes to the pushback against that, what do you make of what we've seen from the US and what it's really capable of doing and handling when it comes to the Red Sea right now?
When was the last time the US Army won a war? Since World War II.
Yeah.
It's not like they cannot inflict pain or damage or destroy a country or destroy a regime. They call it a regime. But when was the last time they scored a decisive victory? The problem with the United States is that the military is privatized. The military industrial complex that is supplying the weapons to the American army is privatized. And these people, at some times, they don't have the interest in winning the war, but prolonging the war. For example, the case of Afghanistan. And they wanted to do the same thing in Ukraine, but it went again against their unfortunate their planning. In contrast, in China, in Russia, those are not privatized, those are state institutions. So the national security and the national interest in Russia and in China, for example, is embedded with the state. In the United States, the national security of the United States, it doesn't necessarily mean embedded with the military industrial complex, because it's privatized sector and private individuals, these billionaires, oligarchs who own this military industrial complex, they have also financial interests. And their financial interests do not always align with the security interests, with the strategic interests of the American people. The American people, the American army should serve the national interests of the American people. And so the question here is, does the American army serve the national interests of the American people? Is the American people interest in Yemen, in Syria, in Israel, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Far East Asia? No. None of these countries attack the United States. But because the United States is an empire, they have to expand. They have to establish certain, what they call order, which is, in my opinion, of course, influence, leverage over different parts of the world. Therefore, they can project their hegemony and power over these countries. Therefore, they use the American military in order to expand the influence of this corporate military industrial complex around the world. For example, what happened in Ukraine nowadays, they didn't win the war, but they won Ukraine in terms of reconstructing the country. We have the bankers now getting exclusive deals to reconstruct Ukraine. Therefore, they are making billions. They sold weapons worth billions of dollars. They did the same thing in Afghanistan. They recycled money in order to generate lots of profits. They spent $2 trillion to replace Taliban with Taliban. So all these things, people think it's a failure, but sometimes we have to see it from the perspective that these people are not fighting to win. They're fighting to generate money. That is why the American empire is demising in terms of its credibility around the world and its might, because they're not following their national security interests. If they want to follow their national security interests nowadays, they have to pursue good relationship with the people in West Asia, because the monetary and financial power is moving to the east. If they are thinking about the national security interests of the American people, they have to join the people in Central Asia, in the Middle East, to reconstruct these countries so that they can also invest in these countries and make profits as well. But they see the profit from one angle. We can produce weapons, we inflict damage, we sell weapons, and then we can reconstruct this country. This is how the American economy works. That's why the people see in China and in Russia alternative powers, not like because they like China or Russia or because they love Vladimir Putin, because these powers presented an alternative approach. The Chinese comes and say, look, this is a win-win formula. I build you a port, you profit, I profit. I may be profiting more, but you're also profiting from the bridges, from the infrastructure I'm building for you. And I'm gaining influence around the world by building your infrastructure instead of destroying your infrastructure, right? All the powers around the world like to expand in their influence. This is the history of humanity from day one. But this is just a difference of the approach between the United States and the Russians and the Chinese. Therefore, what's happening in the Red Sea is a scandal nowadays, because nobody wants to join the United States in a coalition against the Houthis, especially after what happened in Ukraine. These countries can see United States is now abandoning Ukraine, abandoning Europe after telling them to send billions of worth of weapon to Ukraine, and now they have an animosity with Russia, whereas they used to buy cheap gas in Germany in order for the economy to be functioning and competitive around the world. Everybody lost in the Ukraine war except for some of the few in the United States. So I think the Europeans can see this. Why would they join a coalition now against the Houthis? And now the French cargo ships will be targeted, German cargo ships will be targeted, British cargo ships will be targeted if they join the coalition. And as long as they don't join the coalition, their cargo ships will work freely. The only cargo ships that are targeted at the current moment is the Israeli-linked cargo ships, not Americans, not British, not French. And everything they say about this thing is a lie. And speaking of American concern of international trade routes, so they are concerned about that, right? What about the countries that they sanction them, choke them with sanctions up until this moment in Cuba, in Iran, in Syria, in Russia, in all around the world? They impose draconian sanctions, unilateral coercive measures outside the corridors of the UN, which are illegal under international law. And they block these countries from doing trade, buying certain products. If there is any American technology in any product, they block it. And they come after third country factories and companies, and they tell them, if you sell this medical equipment to Syria, I'm going to put you on a blacklist. You're not going to make business with the United States. This is bulldogging. They're coming after countries and third state factories and companies and imposing sanctions on them if they do trade with Syria, with Iran, with Cuba, with other countries, but at the same time they worried about the international trade routes, right? The hypocrisy here is sickening. Sometimes I truly try to be objective in this regard. Every journalist has to be objective, but the hypocrisy levels is too unimaginable for us to stay silent and not criticize the United States, especially that the United States is the superpower. It's in charge of the international system, international community. Therefore, our criticism should be directed to the United States when the United States doesn't comply with the duties and the responsibilities of a superpower. Superpower has to be world police, bring order and security and stability in the world, and not be part of destabilizing the world. As long as the United States plays this destructive role, then yeah, we will criticize it harshly.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a really good point there, bringing up what is driving the US when it comes to these really military, I guess, conquest, if you could call it that, but not even so much. Because as you're pointing out there, it's about destroying, rebuilding, and making profits at the end of the day. Now, when it comes to this growing multipolar world that we're seeing right now, you've got the US and it goes to countries and it threatens them and it says, you're going to do what we want, or else we could overthrow your government, we could destroy your country. And then you've got other countries like Russia and China that come in and say, hey, we want to work with you. This is a mutually beneficial relationship. At the same time, you also have the US driving more war, it refused any kind of peace talks in Ukraine. Now it's refusing any kind of ceasefire in Gaza. Whereas Russia and China were the two countries day one saying, hey, we need to have talks, we need to have a two-state solution, we need a ceasefire. What is the message that sends to the rest of the world when they see Russia and China becoming increasingly powerful and they're saying, hey, these are the two countries that are calling for peace, calling for mutually beneficial relationships, versus the US, which has very much become a bully to the rest of the world in a lot of ways?
Actually, the other day I was watching a Russian philosopher, and he was explaining multipolarity, and he opened my eyes on something that I didn't really notice in the past few years. I thought multipolarity is just creating an international system where we have the two or three or four poles and different superpowers, and they are managing the affairs of the world. And that's not only the case; that's part of it. The other part is the cultural, let's say, and the value. Multipolarity. Under a unipolar world of the United States goes after its adversaries and even its friends if they don't comply with the way of life that the United States wants for the entire world to follow, the values that the Americans want for the entire world to follow. For example, if you remember what is happening now in Hungary. Hungary is ruled by a conservative government, and they're coming after their ally and bullying it so that they accept their neoliberal values in Hungary. The same thing they did with their ally in Qatar during World War II. Like they left everything in Qatar, for example, supporting terrorism in the region, supporting the Al Nusra Front, Al Qaeda groups in the region. They didn't say anything about that, but they came and criticized Qatar for not accepting the LGBTQ plus community values in their country. So you can see that the Americans are not only bullying their adversaries, but also their allies, and they're forcing everyone to accept a universal set values that the American establishment says that the entire world has to believe in this. Under a multipolar world, this is going to be abolished because the Russians and the Chinese, sorry for the language, but they don't give a two damn what do you believe in, what is your religion, what is your what value do you believe in? You are from the LGBTQ, fine. If you are not from the LGBTQ, again, fine. They come to your country. We want to do business with you. We want win-win. We are coming to make business. We're going to make profits together, and we're going to grow together. They don't care what value do you believe in. This is also under multipolar world. This is going to be established, and this is a good news for the entire world because there are set of wars that the United States, after the fall of the Soviet Union, waged against different countries, starting from even Yugoslavia, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. And they always said, we're here to spread democracy. We're here to spread freedoms in this country. They hate us because they hate our freedoms. And nobody in Syria or Iraq heard what is these freedoms that they're speaking about in the United States for the first time, And yeah, but they used this to wage wars. This was in the Bush doctrine. This was in the Wolfowitz doctrine, that they want to intervene and wage preemptive wars around the world, of course, to keep the United States as a hegemonic power, but in front of the international public, they have to sell it in a different way, that we are here to free the women, liberate the people from a dictator Assad, from dictator Saddam, from dictator Gaddafi. But the people have to follow up on these cases and see that what happened to in the aftermath of the Iraq War? What happened in the aftermath of the Libyan War? Was there any sort of democratic rule established there? Did these communities advance the way that the U.S. establishment has promised us to? Right? And the answer is absolutely no. Therefore, there is no need to fall for this trap again and again. And then this message is for the people of the region. And we can see nowadays Biden goes to Saudi Arabia, a traditional ally of the United States, and they handshake each other like this. And then Putin goes to Saudi Arabia, and they're like hugging each other like bros. Those body languages matter in the Arab world. People need to know that when leaders show such an affection to another leader, means the relationship between both countries is also on a similar level, and there is a level of trust. And this trust also comes from the American. Um, they don't have friends, right? They abandon their friends very quickly. Who Saddam Hussein was the friend of the United States until the 90s, and then they turned against Saddam Hussein. Libya, when he tried Gaddafi to pursue good relationship with the Americans, Obama shook hands with him and then murdered him. They don't have friends. So I think it was Kissinger, right, who said to be America's enemy is dangerous, but to be America's friend is fatal. I think under the current establishment in the United States, they're very brutal and sometimes psychopathic, and they want to continue their hegemonic status around the world with hard power. And if it doesn't work that way, they have their so-called NGOs, USAID, NED, and all these countries like all these organizations, they come like worms and they spread in a society, and they prepare the ground for a color revolution like they did in Ukraine, they did it in Georgia, they did it in Armenia. And they turn this country upside down so that the Americans come and they occupy it in a soft way this time. And this is happening through indoctrination and preparing the people for accepting what is called the American values. And this is happening, well, of course, in Eastern Europe, in the former Soviet Union countries, because the United States wants to encircle Russia, and they don't want for Russia to become. Russia is still upper regional, let's say, power. It didn't yet become a superpower yet, so they're trying to contain it on the borders with Ukraine. This is where they wanted to set the border now for Russia, so that Russia would not have an influence in Europe again.
Yeah, certainly a lot at stake here, and a blueprint the US has had for many years the rest of the world is very quickly learning from. I appreciate you taking the time to join me today to discuss the latest. Kevork Almassian, a political commentator and founder of Syriana Analysis. Thank you so much for your time and insight today.
Thank you very much for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. You can sign up as a paid subscriber there, or if you also want to support my work, be sure to check out my page on Buy Me a Coffee. You can sign up for a monthly level there or just for a one-time donation. As always, I appreciate all of y'all's support so much. I'll see you next time.